Ego, friend or foe, is the topic this morning. The ego is both. It's both a friend because we need the ego in the beginning. The soul evolves through many forms before it reaches the human form. And when it reaches the human form, it's ready to become self-aware. And so the ego comes in to help that self-consciousness to arise so that we can understand the individual self. But then that foe gets a grip on us and starts controlling and wanting to have its own way and lead us in its own will. And then the ego becomes the foe, because we have to transcend the likes and dislikes. We have to transcend the desires. So much of what makes the ego strong is just those things: the attachments, the desires, the likes, and the dislikes. I like this person, don't like that person. I want this, lots of money. I don't want that, lots of bad health. I want what I want, and I want it. And that's the ego. Our job is to transcend that ego. The scriptures of India tell us that this body, which is what the ego identifies with and makes itself very strong by that identity, this body is like a clay vessel, so the scriptures say. And in death, when that vessel is broken, it dissolves into nothingness. But the ego, but the soul, is like the air within that vessel. It's never destroyed. It transcends. It is eternal, that eternal Atman. And that's what we need to identify with. We had a Krishna celebration on Friday night that was really wonderful. One of the people who attended said afterwards, "Why wasn't the press here? You should have been here to review this wonderful play." And it was heavenly. It was truly heavenly. That's what I think we do best in Ananda. We inspire each other with these beautiful events that help us to remember who we really are, what we're really doing here, and what life is all about. And in that play, one of the most inspiring things for me was, well, for one thing, the similarities between Jesus' birth and Krishna's birth. There's the slaughter of the innocents, the miraculous conception, the harrowing escape from danger, all these many, many parallels. If you study it, it's quite interesting. And Devaki, Krishna's mother, had been the favorite of her brother, the king. And then a voice from the heavens on her wedding day to Vasudeva, a voice from heaven declared, "The 8th child of Devaki will kill you, O king." And so her brother, King Kamsa, immediately hated his sister, threw her in prison, and only spared her life because her new husband, Vasudeva, said, "You know me to be a righteous man. It's not Devaki who will kill you, it's her children. And so every time we have a child, I will offer you this child." And the scriptures say that every desire can be overcome. Every object can be overcome to the man of wisdom. And what a test Vasudeva had. Every child that was born to him and his wife he gave to the king, who immediately killed it, sent it back to the astral world. Can you imagine the grief of Devaki? 6 children were killed by the king. The 7th, the sage Nanda was able to smuggle out, and the 8th, of course, was Krishna, which was the whole story in itself. Should have been there Friday night. But what I found so inspiring was that Devaki, when, losing 6 children, that's enough to make anybody go crazy. She became pregnant with Krishna, and the king was so insane with fear that he threw her and her husband into the dungeon. So there she is, she's pregnant. She's chained to a pillar in the dungeon. She could be wild with grief over the loss of all these children. She could be wild with fear for the safety of her 8th baby. How is she going to be delivered of this child and let it grow up so that it can fulfill its destiny and rid the land of this evil king, Kamsa? How can she, protect this little sacred being? Is she in any of those things? Is she in the past with grief? Is she in the present with the agony of her situation? Is she in the future with fear? No. She is in bliss because she is only aware of God within her and all around her. She's not worried about anything. She trusts that God will take care of everything. She knows that God must have had a plan, as indeed he did. All these 6 children that she lost so violently were all great souls who incarnated specifically to help with this drama. They were free souls. This was just a gift to God that they gave. None of this affected Devaki in the slightest, because she was only aware of God in everything and protecting her. And of course, as the story goes, I'll give you a hint if you weren't there on Friday. The locks on the dungeon door fell away. All the guards were sleeping. Vasudeva was able to take the sacred baby in his arms after his chains fell off and walked to freedom through storms, through dangers. But he didn't even get wet because there was a giant cobra with 100 heads and it came over him like this and protected him and the baby. So God took care of everything, as God will take care of everything if we let him, if we open our hearts to him, if we give him all of our grief, all of our present situation full of ill health or money troubles or any of the myriad things that can plague us. And if we give him our fear for the future, trust that he will take care of everything. I was reading a little bit more of the story of Krishna as an incarnation of Vishnu, and I was intrigued to read that Devaki and Vasudeva had, through many, many births, loved God. And one thing that stands out in my mind is that they practiced austerities for 12,000 years in order to win the vision of God. And when they had that vision, they saw the baby Krishna, that incarnation of Vishnu. And they could have asked for liberation. They could have just been freed right then, but their love for God was so great that when God said, do you want a boon? Do you want a favor from me? They said, yes, Lord, will you be born as our son? And so Krishna's birth was the third time that they had had God as their child. Through that tremendous love, that's what this universe is based on. It's not based on all the myriad diversity that we see. It's based in love, just as the affirmation was saying. The power of saints, the power of God realization that we will achieve eventually, is based and rooted in divine love. And that's what we can do right now, today, to help push us further on that path to realization. We can keep loving and love more. There is no end to how much we can love and how much we can get rid of all the things within us that keep us bound to that ego. We need to free ourselves from everything that is not of God. And the reason is a very selfish one. By doing so, we become happy. Just like Devaki, bound to the pillar in the dungeon, in bliss. We can be free in this lifetime.
This topic about the ego, these questions are the sort that can be answered in interesting ways. Ego, friend or foe. Nirmala said both. You could also say yes, ego, friend or foe, yes. It all depends on where we are. This is actually a very sophisticated way of looking at the truth, because it's relative to our own point along the journey. As a child, we need to own ourselves. We have to have a self-identity. Every child growing up needs to achieve a certain degree of self-control, a certain degree of self-identity, of claiming their own life, of claiming who they are in life. And that's a very natural and a very important stage. But as Nirmala pointed out, there comes a stage along the journey where we've done that. We've been there. And to keep on doing it, to keep on claiming, this is who I am, this is what I think my life is about, is a way of framing infinity. It's a way of putting a box around light. And eventually, it does not satisfy us. Eventually, if we're going to go beyond that to our own potential, we have to be willing to step out of what we know, step out of what we think, step out of what we think we are, and go beyond. And go beyond into the unknown initially, yes, but eventually into what is truly ours and not what we think is ours. I want to take a moment to continue the story that Nirmala was telling about Krishna, because of course, as I think most of us know, that story continues on to become the Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad Gita, which we read it from every week, is taken. It's a small excerpt of the larger scripture, the larger story of the Mahabharata. Interestingly, that very word, Mahabharata, Maha means great. Bharata is actually the name of India. If you look at what does an Indian call their own country, you know, Germany is called Deutschland by Germans. You know, it's not Germany. To a Spaniard, Germany is Alemania. etc. But to an Indian, the name of the country is Bharata. And so the great consciousness of the Lord, that is the Lord's name, one of many, many of the Lord's names. But this whole drama plays out. And it's a drama, as I think we all know, a drama of good versus evil, of the light shining forth and playing through all these characters, all these different aspects of our own nature. And it becomes a great battle toward the end, and the battle is fought and debated over initially and then eventually fought. But there's a character in that battle that bears mention and a little bit of discussion. The character is Bhishma. His name is Bhishma. And Bhishma represents the ego. And he's the grandfather, the quote grandfather, of all the characters. He's regarded with tremendous esteem by everyone, the quote good guys and the quote bad guys both. And he has gotten an interesting boon. He chose in early life, because of concatenation of circumstances, he chose to not marry. He took a vow that he would never marry. And because he took this tremendous, terrible vow to never marry, he was given a boon. And the boon was that he could never be killed. He could never be killed by anyone. No power on the earth could take his life unless and until he gave it up willingly. And so this incredible battle is fought, and you have this character who can't be killed. And so naturally, at some point, his own part in it comes into play. And so, as the boon describes, he can't be killed, but eventually he becomes immobilized. How? He becomes filled, his body is covered with arrows. He is wearing arrows by the end of this battle. So much so that he can't actually touch the ground even if he falls over, because he's resting on a bed of arrows. He is stuck full of arrows. And the battle finishes, the forces of light are victorious, and here is Bhishma, who has fought on the wrong side. We have Krishna, who plays the role of a charioteer for Arjuna, who represents self-control in ourselves, one of the forces of light. Bhishma, meanwhile, has chosen to fight on the side of the darkness, or the side of materialism. And so here he is at the end of this long battle, resting on this bed of arrows. And the forces of light come to him, and they take his blessing, and they ask him. In fact, Krishna himself says, please give a discourse on the duties of a king. And so Bhishma gives this long discourse. It goes on for weeks and weeks. I mean, it's not just a little 5 or 10 minute discourse, do this, don't do that, oh, this is a really bad idea. I mean, he goes on and on about how you should lead a people. And he's teaching Yudhisthira, who's the head of the forces of light. And finally, when the time is right, when he has Krishna's blessing, when the stars have all lined up in just the right way, then he says, okay, now I offer myself up. There's a deep, deep symbolism in all this, because identity can never be killed. Once we have a sense of self, that self is never lost. We may change forms, we may lose the body, we may walk out into a different form, we may live in the astral world for a time, etc., etc. But that sense of self is never lost. It just changes its focus, its direction of energy. And similarly, Bhishma can never be killed until he's ready. Well, the ego is never lost until we are ready to offer it up. And we have to do so willingly. And this is something that can never be forced on someone. We have to come to the point where we not only want it, but we're ready for it. This past week I was reading the story of a couple of people who experienced a spiritual awakening. And the experience initially was quite traumatizing, actually, because they went into this place of realizing that they had their limited self-identity was essentially just an idea. It was just sort of an interesting little sideshow. But their awareness was infinite, or their awareness was huge, it was vast, it wasn't limited by space. And they found it very disorienting. When our identity is wrapped around our senses, when we're aware of this world through our eyes, through our ears, through the sense of taste and touch and smell, it's all localized. And if you suddenly experience, and this of course we know from studying near-death experiences, people have this, many people have the experience of realizing that their consciousness and their body are actually two different things. They don't have to be tied together. And so you'll have people who are on the operating table and leave the body and watch the operation or go to some other place and are aware of other people talking about them or thinking about them, etc. And again, they may find that very disorienting. But what ties it all together is the sense of the heart, the awareness of the heart. This is something that our own path, Yogananda, in bringing us the teachings of India, he emphasized devotion as a way of overcoming that fear of getting bigger than our little self. And this, in a few moments, we're going to hear this beautiful song, I Live Without Fear. This is a song that Swamiji wrote on a sort of difficult occasion when someone had just spent an hour taking him to task, essentially for his whole life, basically saying, you're a failure, everything you've done is disaster, it's worthless, it's pointless, why do you even bother, essentially, is what the person was saying. And Swamiji listened and thanked the person left, and he walked over to the piano and started playing this song and wrote it down, and it became I Live Without Fear. And it's a wonderful song, not only for the beauty of the music, but also for the beauty of the message. Though green summer fade and winter draw near. Well, take this, again, as Nirmala was saying, suggesting, take this as today. Green summer, if such as it ever was, actually, has faded pretty well, I think we can safely say by now. It's fading away, fall will come in a few weeks, and winter draw near. My Lord, in your presence, I live without fear. Live in that presence of God. Know that that presence is wrapped all around you like a child wrapped in the mother's arms.
Through tempest, through snow.
Thank you. Through tempest, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my friend. Know that that message, know that that closeness is always yours, but it moves behind this identity that is so, you could say, kind of white-knuckled around the steering wheel of life. You know, we think we're driving the boat, the car, the whatever, and there's a flow to it, there's a grace to it, there's a joy to it that's guiding us. if we will let it, to the degree that we will let it. And there will come a time for everyone where this little ego, this Bhishma that is our own limited self-identity, will willingly offer itself into that joy, into that divine light, willingly and joyfully. This is not a path of suffering. You know, it's very easy to think of this destruction of the ego, destruction of desire, destruction of all the things that we think of as ourselves, as this kind of distasteful path of abstinence or withdrawal or sort of renunciation in a negative sense, like we just simply have to do without. But just as the saint was quoted in the beautiful reading, he says, how have I renounced anything? You're reversing the case. I've got a kingdom of cosmic endless bliss. Excuse me, I've given up a few little bits of nonsense that were holding me down, that were holding the balloon of my consciousness stuck to the earth. I'm flying in infinity. I have everything I need. So feel that that is your true self-identity. And when the time comes, and in the natural evolution of our awareness, we offer ourselves into that with love and with joy. And there is no fear in that. There is no sense of lack in that.